Welcome back to the Byzantine Catholic Seminary's online course, The Plainchant of the Byzantine Catholic Church. In this lecture, we'll present the basic musical concepts that you need in order to participate in this course. Some of this material is not strictly necessary for all students, and we'll review at the end what you really need to know out of this. Some of it's presented so that people with additional musical background will come to this and understand the approach that we're taking in the course. Sound consists of vibrations in a fluid medium, normally air, and the frequency or the rate of vibration of the sound is experienced by us as pitch. Frequency is usually measured in cycles or vibrations per second, or equivalently hertz, which means the same thing. The pitch of a sound is the apparent frequency as perceived by hearing. Because most sounds are composed of several frequencies at once, the ear and the brain must sort them out so that our brain can understand what it is that we're hearing. In many languages, higher frequency sounds are referred to as high sounds, and lower frequency sounds are referred to as low sounds. This occurs even with people who have no sense of the physical property of sound as vibrations in air, since these vibrations are normally invisible. Human beings can hear a much wider range of pitches than they can generate by speaking or singing. Ancient Greek philosophers or natural philosophers used a stringed instrument with a movable bridge called a monochord to investigate sounds with different frequencies. They discovered that when a string was divided into distances with different ratios, they could hear particular relationships among the pitches. An interval is the pitch difference we hear between two different sounds. That is, whether the difference between two pitches is large or small. The human vocal and hearing system causes us to prefer some intervals over others. Early experimenters found that these natural intervals were associated with pitch ratios, or ratios of frequencies, consisting of small numbers. For example, doubling a frequency, that is a ratio of 2 to 1 between the high frequency and the low one, creates a tone that sounds like the original sound, but higher. The corresponding pitch interval is called an octave. Two notes an octave apart sound the same. This is why, for example, men and women, who normally have different vocal ranges, can sing the same song together. Normally they will be singing one or more octaves apart. Increasing a starting frequency by 50%, that is a ratio of 3 to 2 between the new frequency and the old one, gives a bright trumpet-like interval, which we call a perfect fifth, for reasons that we'll see in a moment. Increasing a frequency by a third, a ratio of 4 to 3, produces a solid sounding interval, which we call a perfect fourth. Increasing a frequency by 2/3 gives a major sixth, and increasing a frequency by 1/4 gives a major third. Increasing a frequency by 1/8, a ratio of 9 to 8, gives what we call a major second, and increasing a frequency by 7/8 gives a major seventh. Now, this sounds mathematical and not very intuitive, but if we start with a single pitch and arrange these intervals from large to small, we get the following. If our starting pitch is la, then a ratio of 9 to 8 gives the following interval. La, la. That's a major second. If we use a ratio of 5 to 4, the starting pitch is la, la, a major third. A ratio of 4 to 3 gives la, la. A ratio of 3 to 2, la, la, which is the trumpet sounding interval we mentioned earlier. A major sixth, la, la. A major seventh, la, la. And the octave, la, la. Now, if we sing these pitches in order, we have the following. La, 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 which most of us learned in childhood to associate with pitch names: do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do, as in the song Do a Deer from The Sound of Music. These names were first invented in the Middle Ages to help singers learn new melodies, and are still used for that today. Breaking the scale down, we find that the interval between any two steps of the scale is either the same as the major second, we call this a tone or a whole tone, and an interval half that size, which we call a semitone or half tone, sometimes a half step. A semitone is the interval from the major seventh, T, up to the octave, Do. Now, let's add these pitch names to our table. Each of the intervals from one step to the next, that is, for example, from Do to Re and Re to Mi, is a whole step or a whole tone, except for Mi to Fa and Ti to Do. These are half steps. So the sound of a major scale is the sound of a whole step, and a half step, a whole step, a whole, and a half. Do, re, mi, fa. That's whole, half. Fa, sol, la, ti, do, which is the whole, and half. We can sing the scale up, and we can start at any different pitch. For example, we could start at Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or down. Do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. As a shorthand, we could say that the major scale has half steps at 3 to 4, that is Mi to Fa, and Ti to Do, that is 7 to 8. When singing using the major scale, the pitch Do acts as a sort of home pitch or stable center. But if we sing the same scale, starting at La instead, it has a very different sound. So instead of Do, mi, so, mi, do, ti, la, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. This scale, with half steps between the second and third notes and the fifth and sixth notes, is called a natural minor scale. You can make 8 different scales in this way by starting at different places on the major scale and singing 8 consecutive notes. The major and minor scales together are the ones most used in Western classical music. All of these are called diatonic scales. They are made up of whole steps and half steps in a certain regular order. For example, there are never 2 consecutive half-step intervals in diatonic scales. All these scales have had 7 notes, not counting the repeating Do, but this is not the only possibility. For example, a pentatonic scale, 5 notes per octave, is used around the world in folk music. Here is the scale used in Stephen Foster's O Susanna. Do, re, mi, sol, la, do. This sort of scale avoids several kinds of clashing or dissonance that can occur when you have half steps in the scale. A chromatic scale consists entirely of half-step intervals. And some cultures break out of the half-step, whole-step system entirely. Indian and Arabic music, for example, make use of microtunings that involve smaller intervals. But all of the discussion so far has assumed an arbitrary starting note. This works for one singer, or for several people singing in octaves. One person picks a note and everyone can sing the same melody starting with that note in their own vocal range. But as soon as several people sing in harmony, or play several instruments together, it becomes important to be able to talk about particular pitches, if only to tune the instruments together. Early musicians in the West associated the letters A through G with the notes of the natural minor scale and began giving them standard pitches. For example, the modern concert A pitch is 440 cycles per second, or hertz. To go from a minor scale to a major scale, we have to work our way up from La to Do, in other words, from A to C. So the major scale, beginning on C, became a sort of default scale in Western music. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, corresponding to Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. As a consequence, there are half steps between E and F, that is mi and fa, and between B and C, that is ti and do. With this system, and an agreement on where A or C are, we can name any pitch in the usual diatonic scales. To refer to the remaining pitches in the chromatic scale, which also sneak in when we harmonize music, we use the sharp sign placed after a letter to mean the pitch 1/2 step higher than the letter's usual pitch, and a flat sign to mean the pitch 1/2 step lower. So the chromatic scale would be C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and C. There's no need for a sharp on E or B because there are only E to F is a 1/2 step, so there's no sharp or flatted note in between, and B to C is a 1/2 step. On a piano, the white keys correspond to letter names in the scale with no sharps or flats, while the black keys correspond to the chromatic pitches in between. So now, using these letter names and sharps and flats, we can actually write down musical pitches. For example, we could put note names over the words of a song and give some fairly exact idea how to sing it, as long as you knew, for example, how long to hold each note. If several people are singing in harmony, we might put several different letters over each word, which becomes confusing, so we really need a way to put a lot of musical information on a single page. The modern solution of this problem first originated in the European Middle Ages. Draw several parallel lines and put marks on the lines for the notes. The higher the pitch, the higher the mark on the stack of lines. Use different marks to show how long to hold each note, and any words that are sung can go over or under the musical marks or notes. In the modern version of the solution, we use a 5-line staff. Each line on the staff and each space between the lines corresponds to a particular note of our scale. If the music is higher or lower than the staff, we can add small lines called ledger lines to temporarily extend it. But we still need a way to associate a particular line or space with a particular note. For example, there's no way from either of these to tell where C or A or F is. One early solution assigned the C of the C major scale to the middle line of the 5-line staff and put a mark called a clef, from the Latin word for key, clevis, on this line as a key to reading the music. This clef, the C clef or alto clef, consists of 2 backwards letter C's and shows that the line between the C's is the note C. Eventually, however, musicians decided that for most uses, they wanted the C major scale to cover the lower part of the 5-line staff, and they began writing C on the first ledger line under the staff. The new staff, clef rather, consisted of a stylized letter G with a curlicue in the middle surrounding the line that the pitch G, 2 lines above C, ends up on. So if you look at the letter G on the staff and follow the line to the left, you will see that it's in the middle of the curlicue of the G clef. One drawback of this clef is that it puts C at an inconvenient place for chant melodies, which often go up and down from the starting pitch. Using the staff shown above with C as our starting pitch, the notes of the melody could easily go off the chart and be hard to follow. Changing the clef for each chant would be confusing. It would be easier to keep the same clef and just start our major scale on another note, such as F or G. In other words, we start with another pitch as do, something other than C. If we start a major scale on D, for example, to get a major scale, we need whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. D up a whole step is E. E up a whole step is F sharp, because E to F is a 1/2 step, so E to F sharp is a whole step. F sharp up a 1/2 step is G. G up a whole step is A. A up a whole step is B. B up a whole step is C sharp, and C sharp up a 1/2 step is a D, giving us our major scale pattern. So a major scale starting on D is D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. We can put sharp signs before every note of the scale to which they apply, or gather them at the start of the line and have them apply to all the F's and C's in the music. Using this technique, we can start a major scale anywhere we like on the staff, while still keeping the notes on the same lines and spaces. The sharps or flats at the start of each line of music are called the key signature. If any other notes require sharp or flat signs, or a natural sign which cancels a sharp or flat, we add them before the note, and they apply up until the next bar line or vertical dividing line in the music. The bottom of this slide, you will see the key signatures which are normally used with prosopinea. If there are no sharps and flats in the key signature, then we are in the key of C major and the do of the scale is on the first ledger line. If there are two sharps, do of the scale is on the space below the first line of the staff. If there is one flat, then the do of the scale is on the first space. If there is one sharp, then do is on the second line from the bottom. And if we are in the key of B flat major, or two flats, then do is on the middle line. The first four of these key signatures place our chant melodies, which usually go above do, in the lower part or middle part of the five-line staff. We will see later why the key B flat major, with do on the middle line, has historical significance. We use different shapes of notes to show the length of each musical note. The four note types here are the whole note, or a round circle, a half note, an open circle with a vertical flag. A quarter note is a filled circle with a flag. And the eighth note is a circle with a vertical line and a tail. Each of these notes is held half as long as a previous type of note. Thus, one whole note is a duration the same length as two half notes, or four quarter notes, or eight eighth notes. A dot immediately after a note increases its duration by 50% or one half, so a dotted half note is equal to three quarter notes. Notes can also be tied together to make up a single longer note. And eighth notes can be barred together, as shown in the example, to show how they are grouped. When there is text being sung, it's normally placed below the staff, divided into syllables to match the musical notes. When a syllable is sung through more than one note, a slur is used to group these notes together visually. Short vertical lines, called bar lines, divide up the music. In music with a regular meter, or beat, they simply mark the metric divisions, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, with the bar line at each repeat of the meter. In chant, instead, bar lines are used to mark phrases. A double bar may be used to mark the end of a piece of music, or a place where the music passes to someone else, or another singer or group of singers. A final bar with two dots marks a repeat, a point at which the musicians go back to the beginning of the section to be repeated. The beginning of the repeat is marked by a repeat bar facing the other way. Now that we have the staff notation, we can discuss two minor points which will be of importance later in the course. The half step between T and Do in the major scale gives a sense of completion on reaching the home note of the scale. For this reason, T is sometimes called a leading tone. Ti, Do. And this sort of cadence is often heard, for example, in the endings of symphonies, emphasizing the return to our home pitch. The natural minor scale lacks a leading tone because from So to La is a whole tone, and this can cause dissonance or clashing when melodies in the scale are harmonized in thirds. For this reason, the seventh degree of the scale is sometimes raised a half step, giving us the harmonic minor scale. But this causes a further problem. The interval between Fa and Si is 1.5 steps, which is difficult to sing correctly. So when the minor scale is used for singing melodies, both the 6th and 7th degrees are raised, giving us the melodic minor scale. To keep the feel of the minor tonality, the scale can be sung differently, going up and coming down. For example, La, ti, do, re, mi, fi, si, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. The use of harmonic and melodic minor scales is an important part of the major-minor tonality used in Western music, and as we shall see later, has had an influence on prostopinija singing. Human speech is inherently musical, in that it makes use of pitch and rhythm, even if only in subtle ways. Speech which stays on the exact same pitch lacks expression. We call it speaking in a monotone. But when speech is sung on a single pitch, it can be sung with expression by varying the rhythm, intensity, and tone. Speech which keeps the exact same rhythm sounds mechanical, even if we vary the pitch. Some languages, such as French, space syllables in a very regular way while allowing slight variations. To a non-French speaker, this may even sound like, for example, a machine gun rhythm. Other languages, such as English and Slavonic, are spoken in such a way that accents fall at regular intervals. These are called stress-timed languages. So, for example, in this sentence, these are called stress-timed languages. Stressed, timed, and lang are all accents. And you can hear the speech slow down to keep the same rhythm. These are called stress-timed languages. Speech associated with intensity, or to accompany regular motion, such as work or walking, may have a much more consistent rhythm. For example, each syllable may be given the same amount of time regardless of accent if one is angry, or if one is, for example, doing regular physical work while singing. Many languages require that certain parts of words be accented by pitch, volume, or intensity. We're usually less sensitive to a missing accent than to an accent that appears in the wrong place. Let me say that again. We are usually less sensitive to a missing accent than to an accent that appears in the wrong place. In the same way, entire words or phrases can be highlighted using accent. In some languages, emphasis is added by moving parts of a phrase to the beginning or to the end, by repetition, or by other rhetorical tools such as assonance and rhyme. Complex utterances, consisting of complicated thoughts or several thoughts strung together, are usually divided up by pauses of varying lengths. The end of a human speech, the conclusion, usually requires some kind of special auditory marking to indicate that we are done. Whenever you are listening to speech or to chant in this course, please make an effort to notice how sound and meaning are interrelated in speech and in song. Things to remember from this lesson. Our usual diatonic scale of 7 pitches has a basis in both mathematics and in the biology of human hearing and speaking or singing. It is possible to give names to pitches and to sing them without any sort of musical notation. There are many possible musical scales. Western classical and popular music rely mainly on the major and minor scales. Modern 5-line staff notation is one way, but not the only way to record music. A key signature, a pattern of sharps and flats at the start of a line of music in 5-line staff notation, shows where the home pitch or do is on the staff. Finally, human speech is inherently musical, and some of our patterns of speaking can also apply to how we sing words, sentences, and longer utterances.